it's almost in the mind of the viewer because you know, does Homelander think he's redeemable? Does Homelander think he's wrong?
Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a wonderful day today. My name is Talal, and you're listening to the Popcorn and Soda Podcast, the show where we discuss all things movies, pop culture, and so much more. I want to thank each and every one of you for making me a small part of your day. On today's show, we're joined by a very special guest. You've seen him in projects such as Fortunate Son, The Detail, and most recently as the unbiased, hard hitting reporter Cameron Coleman on Prime Video's The Boys. On the show today, the very talented and fellow Canadian, Matthew Edison. How are you, Matthew?
Great. Hi, everybody.
Hey, I appreciate you coming to hang out on the show today. And before we get into all things your acting career, how have you been over these last few years personally, living in this ever-changing world? And as you continue to recover from the pandemic, what did life look like for you?
Well, man, that's such a loaded question, for everybody. For me personally, I had kids just before the pandemic. Like, I had one kid before the pandemic, and the second, or like I know we were pregnant about a week before the first lockdown. It was kind of a strange, I don't want to say blessing, that's not the right word, but it sort of suited us because we had two young kids, and it allowed us to be together as a family in those early years with them, quite a bit. They, of course, were young enough for it to be oblivious and weren't old enough that they were in school and dealing with all of those things that other parents were dealing with. So, often with my job, you're doing long hour days, 16-hour days sometimes, and you're um, often filming out of town and things like that. It can be hard on a family to make that all work. So I felt like we got the sort of luckier end of things in terms of being able to be together and not be too pulled out of that from work related. Obviously, there was some anxiety and nerves around what was happening and what would happen, um, but I felt like we managed pretty well, all told, and just kind of hunkered in together. And but then, of course, our kids got very used to having us all the time. And I remember, the first one. It was very fortunate for in our industry that the government had recognized, like, hey, the entertainment industry, people are stuck at home, and they will need things to consume, to watch, and to entertain themselves while we're all stuck at home in isolation. Some people literally isolated alone, and their only connection besides perhaps the internet is these stories that could take us out of ourselves and out of our world to kind of imagine being in other worlds. And it was like theater had stopped, so it was definitely not being able, I wasn't able to like do any live theater work. But I remember getting an offer to do an episode of um, Hudson and Rex out. It's like a cop and dog show out
Yep.
in the East Coast in Newfoundland, and it was very early in it was in like right out. It was very soon after like the lockdown happened, and I turned to my wife and said, I'm a little concerned. Like, should we do so? Like, I'll have to get on a plane. We have a newborn. Like, I'll have to be, and it's everyone's just figuring it out as we go. The protocols are in place, but we're all trying. It's all an experiment. And she was like, "Of course you're going to do it. If you don't do it, then you'll be like one of those people that aren't doing these jobs, and they won't ask you because they'll be, you're concerned." And at first I was like, "Oh, I don't know if that will be the case." But then I found out later it was like, "Oh yeah, like they shortly after that, they agents sent out things like, hey, let us know if you don't want to be on these, like if you don't want to be on set right now because of the pandemic. Totally understand. Just let us know, and we won't like invite you." But because we had two young kids, the thought of not having income, like from my work, was a real, like a lot of people, was a real concern. And so she was like, "Get your butt out there." I was like, "Well, what if something happens to me?" Or she's like, "You just just go." So I did, and I remember on that set we did have a small little moment of actually I think I was in we were quarantined in a like a sort of large like bed and breakfast basically that the production bought out, and basically we were like when I arrived, first of all there was the flight, and you're masked up and there's like, but it was
Yeah.
weird because then people would pull down their mask and eat a little bit of food and put their mask up. I remember this was sort of odd, but I remember my dad was a pilot. He's no longer with us, but he was a pilot, and he would always talk about how like the air quality in a plane is actually quite safe because it's constantly being filtered. It's like just constantly going through a filter versus like if you're in a restaurant or something, you'd be worse off. So I remember that helped me a little bit. And then when he got off the plane, there was a person there to meet me, and I took my own luggage. I should be taking my own luggage, but sometimes they like really like take over, like grab your stuff, and they don't want you to do anything.
Mhm.
So I was like grabbing my luggage. They put me in the van, and the van was really sealed off. And they drove like into a parking lot. It was like something out of The Wire, like they drove into a parking lot, and this other car pulled up like nose to nose, like a couple of cops, and this like hazmat suited nurse got out and did a test on me right out of the window. Like I didn't even leave the car. And then then I was driven to a hotel where one whole floor was a quarantine for temporary while we're waiting to find out about the test. So and then they needed a double negative. So if I was cleared for the first test, then the next day I had another test. And if I was cleared for that, I got moved to this bed and breakfast place. Okay. So I was cleared and I was in there, and I'd already shot a few days. And then I remember one of the other guests, one of the other actors there who was in the building with me. We were out on we weren't allowed to leave like the premises or anything, so we were just like on the patio, like and he was checking Twitter or whatever, and he's like, "Oh, there's a breach on our show," and I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, I just read it on Twitter. Some news guy says that Hudson and Rex has a breach," yeah, and I was like, "What?" So I messaged my agent. I was like, there's this tweet, but we're not hearing anything.
Mm.
So because it was new days, we there was a day or two, there was no filming, and then we regrouped. And the next scene I had, we were in a field, and I remember the crew was out there, and everybody was there, but nobody was filming. Nobody was touching anything until the producer showed up, because there were people who were literally ready to walk because they were concerned that there was no proper communication. And so in fact, I think one of the sound guys walked. He's like,
Oh,
it's
wow.
too risky for me, because it was sort of over the weekend. And like what happened was some people had gone to I remember one of the crew guys had gone to a big wedding with like older people there and everything. And when he found out, he could have been told at the time, and he could have not gone to that wedding. And he doesn't know, you know what I mean? He was really
Yeah.
concerned the way that all happened. But the producer, in to his own, to just have some empathy for him too. Like, he came out and he said to him, he's like, "Look, we're figuring this out as we go, but the protocols for the province are such that when there was a breach, I immediately have to contact the health division of the province, and they take over everything, including communication. We are not allowed to do anything after that." And that's what happened there. And the province, which is not as familiar with how movies work or TV, didn't do that kind of communication chain.
Mm.
In the end, the production turned out to have done everything perfectly. In that they had caught the person. I believe it was like a family member of one of the actors, main actors, and they were coming in from LA, and they were asymptomatic. They didn't know, and so they got in, they got the test in the parking lot, they went to the hotel, and they found out, oh, they're positive. So they just were quarantined at that hotel for a couple of weeks. And everything was fine. And in fact, the government contacted the production company to see what they did right, so that they could, review their own protocols to constantly improve them. So the last thing I'll say on this was that film sets became sort of like petri dishes. They're like little towns. There's many, many, many people. There's like,
Yeah.
sometimes thousands of people working on these shows. So it was a way. I don't think they were going, "Hey, let's see," like completely, like, well, let's just let them get infected and see what happens. I think they were looking at all of these different productions and learning the best things from each of them. And the government used that opportunity to improve our own protocols. And we had a very good track record in Canada. In fact, very few issues when you think of how many people work on these shows and how involved they are for instance, if you're an actor, anyone working with an actor who has to remove their mask to be filmed. So we would be masked right up, even in rehearsal sometimes, right up until they're about to shoot. And then the masks are removed. And anyone who was in contact with us, that's hair, makeup, wardrobe, director, some of the film crew people that are immediate within contact. I forget the name. They had like a word or a number or a name that was for those
Mhm.
people. All of those people had to be checked throughout the day, like every day, tested, and so they got like repeatedly tested simply because they were in contact with us, and other people or crew members and stuff who wouldn't necessarily, who might be in a department down in props building something, they weren't subjected to that same thing. But for us, it was always a little thing. Like I normally, like I had a gun I had to shoot at one point. They took it from me, cleaned it right off in front of me, put it immediately in a lockbox with gloves and put it away so that I could see. It was very interesting times in the work side of things. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to kind of look back almost where it feels like this bizarre world almost where it's like, wait a second, did that really happen those 2, 3 years? It's such a blur now looking back at it, seeing the masks, all the protocols on sets that you guys had. And it also begs ask the question, what is an essential business and what is an essential service? And I was always a big believer that the entertainment industry is something that is essential. Now, we may not be a doctor or a nurse, but at the same point, people need that escape just for their mental health. And I think that's so important that these productions were allowed to continue to keep rolling.
You're so right, Talal. Like I was also surprised. I mean, I waver in my own life sometimes thinking about my profession as being sometimes frivolous, like not meaningful. And then other times I think of it as being extremely noble in a weird way. Like I really fluctuate between the validity of what I do sometimes, when you think of all of the things in the world. But it did kind of help remind me that we are, humans as a species, we're social animals. We
Yeah.
crave socialization. And this is a bit of a side thing, but years ago, when I was studying in New York, I remember I used to do this thing on Sundays where, like volunteer thing, you go and it was for you'd hold babies essentially whose parents were either in prison or not able to be there for the baby at the time. Maybe they were dealing with recovery or addiction and things. And a lot of these babies were born with addiction. They predisposed to um, addiction, and they had like withdrawal symptoms and so on. Anyway, we would come into this church basement and hold these babies for an hour, and that was it. And I remember the priest or the minister who gave a little speech beforehand. He said, these babies coming in on a short bus with these like nuns, and then they like hand them off to you, and we would just sit there in a circle holding them. And I remember he said, the reason why this program exists is because if infants and young babies don't feel touch, human connection, like physical skin on skin or physical touch, and they don't hear voices, their ears not against your chest, they don't feel warm blood, they don't feel like literally people around them, they can die. Just like they need food and water without being held, they will cry and cry and cry, and then sometimes they just die. They just let go. Now, it's a terribly sad and sort of morbid thought, but the reverse of that is to remind us that even if you're not a baby, we crave and need connection, socialization, and we need to see our and understand our world reflected back to us in many different ways, sometimes through morality tales, sometimes through cautionary tales, and through all these things. And, you know, you know, everyone's always, people are always saying, oh, either theater's gonna die or the movies are dead or this is gonna, it's like, to me, it's not so much about the medium, it's really just we need story. And for the government, or for our government at least, to recognize, like you say, that it would be an essential service. It was a bit of a wake up call to me too. Like, even if you're doing some like cop and dog show, and it may not, like, it's not there to change the world, but it's there to maybe help you get away from the world that you're in. That can cause mental anxiety and health and issues and things like that. So, yeah, it was a good reminder to take it a little bit more seriously.
Sure, very well said. And as I mentioned up top, I'm a big fan of your work, especially on The Boys. And it's one of
Thank
the
you.
biggest TV. Hey, my pleasure. And that's one of the biggest TV shows in the world. And you absolutely just crush it in that role. So before we even get
Thanks.
into The Boys, let's kind of rewind the clock to the very start. Where does your journey in the creative arts begin, and what inspired you to be an actor?
Well, um, I was, this may be common actually for a lot of actors, but I was very kind of, um, I was a little bit like introverted socially, maybe. Like at home, I was always like cracking up, making my sisters laugh, like doing impressions of my dad and stuff. Very like verbal and leaned more towards like comedy, doing Looney Tunes stuff and things like that. But I never knew like acting was a profession or was something you could do. I just like to play around. But then I would get out publicly and I would find myself like a little bit shy or less able to sort of make that kind of transition. And I was like that for a long time. And then through a series of really strange events where I think I was being bullied at one point. I was in like grade 8 or 9 or something. I knew I was in grade 9. I was grade 8, and then I think those bullies like went to the same school in grade. I was like, oh my god, I'm here in high school too. And and then these other guys at the school who were like bigger and tougher, they kind of took a liking to me. I think I made one of them laugh or something, and then they just took a liking to me. So I was sort of protected from the other guys. But then those guys kept wanting me to like come out and do like stuff, like get in trouble, like do dumb things, skip school and do all this stuff. And
Right.
I just wasn't me. Like I knew that wasn't my tribe or whatever. And I remember thinking I need a way to get out of like going outside at recess. I need to like find something else to do so that I'm not available for them to come and grab me. So I started up doing like chess or something like that, get my butt kicked a lot. And then I was like, okay, I need something else to do. And then eventually a teacher, because I had like done lunch, I like went down to look at like lunchbox theater or whatever. And it really actually wasn't my thing. I didn't like take to it. I didn't really connect with those people either. So I didn't do that. And then that teacher was like, hey, I see you at the, thing for the other day for this. And I said, oh, I don't know if that's for me. And she said, well, what about improvisation or improv? And I was like, well, what's that? She said, oh, there's these kids down in the basement in the far corner down there. And there's like, if you want to, I was like, far corner, basement? Perfect. That's where I'll go. So I went down there and there was not even teacher there. It was just like 9 kids or 8 or 9 kids. And there was one of like every different demographic. Like there was like the shop kid, the brown noser, the class clown, just a real motley crew of different kids that normally don't hang out together. And if and they were doing these sort of improv games, theater games, and they quickly explained. I was quickly invited in, like come on in, and like they would like aside to me how to do certain games and what they're called, and I suddenly my skill set at home of like making people laugh, whatever, was really valued here. And so I really enjoyed that. I just sort of took to it. We went to compete at the Canadian Improv Games and we came in like last or second last. Like we were not a great team. But, and this is kind of one of those life changing moments. The guy who ran it, his name was Johnson Moretti. He was very responsible for taking improv from the Quebec side of things, like which was being done a little bit in there, and bringing it to more mainstream kind of competitive improv across Canada, uniting all these different schools across Canada to compete. And there was no phone, like internet, cell phone, or anything. And he contacted, after we played those games, he contacted my school, asked for which teacher, who the coach was. And it was really just like a sub, it's just like a side teacher who'd pop her head in once in a while to make sure we weren't killing each other. And she was like, oh, okay, I'll go find out. And he basically tells that teacher to tell me to that I have talent as an improvisation or kid or whatever, and that I should audition for Canterbury Art School. Because I was in Ottawa at the time, and there was this now quite well known art school, but at the time I didn't know anything about that. And to make a long story longer, I ended up auditioning for the program and getting in, and around that same time, I kind of again like accidentally, well, like I went to meet a friend of mine who was auditioning for Are You Afraid of the Dark? And I just was waiting for him, like was with him, and I was helping him read his lines, and then he's like, you should audition for this, and I was like, oh, how can I? How do you do that? And he's like, oh, I just put your name up there and stuff, and I went to put my name up, and I was like, oh, they're asking for your agent, and I don't have any of that stuff, so I went and sat down, and he's like, just use my agent, or so I did. Anyway, I ended up booking that job, and and the agent, because she was like, "Who are you?" And you're not on my roster. And I was like, "Well, if I didn't get it, you would never have known." So, and she so that was Kate Mansour out of Ottawa, and so that's sort of. And then I landed, and I came back after filming that, and I was a little bit late starting grade 10 as a result. And I was at this new school, an art school, and I'm coming in late because I'm filming a TV show. You know what I mean? And then I arrived, and then I got on the improv team. It's like my whole life completely changed. Everything that I did not like, I was that square peg trying to be fit into a public school round hole, never worked, right? I was never a smart kid at school. I was never socially accepted at school. And teachers didn't know what to do with me. I wasn't involved. I playing hooky. It was like, and then I went suddenly into being appreciated, and really valued, and really wanting to learn, and just like it completely capsized my very, kind of like flippant sort of life at the time, without direction, without knowing what I was doing, into a very focused thing where everybody around me was saying, "Yes, do more of this, and you should do this." And I got more into it, and more into it, started reading more, learning a lot more. Then, yeah, I went to Stella Adler in New York. I went. We went to Edinburgh Festival of shows. I did a couple of things. Came back to Canada, and just started sort of working, um, almost right away. I guess I yeah. I got an audition for something, and it was one of those things where I was like, if I book this, I think it will help people know at least that I'm here, and maybe things will get easier. And I did book that, and then it did get easier, because people knew who I was. And I think that's one of the hardest things at the beginning when you're competing with so many people, is you can't really work to try and stand out, because it doesn't really work that way. Like if it looks like, if you're looking like you're trying to stand out, or you're working too hard or whatever, it can backfire. You just have to really be yourself, be authentic, work very hard, and do the best you can, and hope someone goes, "Yeah, okay, that's a fit for this." And if you can work really hard to do your job well, but also be someone people like to work with, um, then people remember that, and they might hire you for the next thing, or they might say to someone else at dinner, "Hey, I work with this guy. He's really good, and I really enjoyed working with him. He'd be perfect for this." And sometimes that happens. It doesn't mean you don't have to keep auditioning. Part of being a Canadian actor is that you don't really, sometimes, but you don't really get offered things like the way they talk about. Sometimes you do, but a lot of times you're just always having to prove people who you are, because a lot of times the directors and the producers and people are not from here, and they don't know all of your work and what you've done. And it's part of the job, is that you're always on a job interview, and trying to
Mhm.
convince the hirer that you're the right person for that role. And you may or may not be. That may not be up to you, but that's kind of how it is. And I always say in Canada, you don't get to be famous, but you get to be anonymous.
And that's interesting because Canada's become this hotbed for productions all across the world that are coming here to shoot their projects. And it's interesting, you've been a staple in the Canadian film and television industry for a few decades now. And let's say you have an outsider in like one sentence. What would you say to them the difference between the Canadian film and television industry and Hollywood is? If you had to put it in one sentence, what would you say is the biggest difference?
Money. And I would say money and time. Those are often the two things. If Canada had the resources that the United States does for the entertainment, and that's changing. We're starting to, right?
Mhm.
The crews here, the way that we shoot shows looks now as good as anything coming out of Hollywood. We can make a show now that's not overlit, or the sound mix is bad, or the acting is so
Yeah.
so, the writing is so so, because we have a lot of brain drain, right? A lot of our best writers, to be honest, if you're a writer here and you write for a show here, as a living, you'll make one type of salary, and it will work a certain way. And there's no guarantee. There never is, but in Canada, often you would either get one or maybe two seasons, or you get 15 seasons. but whereas in the States, there was a lot more money and time and growth for different shows to find their feet. We would never have had 20, whatever, 30 seasons of The Simpsons if there wasn't a push because it was supposed to be canceled. Same with Seinfeld, so with other
Mhm.
shows. So we know that now. But in Canada, those shows would be canceled. There wouldn't be like a third season of The Simpsons or a third season or Seinfeld or anything like that because we just don't have the money to take that kind of risk. It's changing, and I think the whole system has changed now. And so not only can you film anything here that looks as, I mean, the stuff we shoot, Handmaid's Tale, other incredible shows now that are winning Emmys and Golden Globes. And so I just think like the mentality has changed. Yes, we offer tax credits to Americans who film here, and if they use certain amounts of Canadian actors and so on. But I think the days of just filling out your show on the outside periphery with some Canadians has changed, where now you can compete for some of those larger roles. But it is a trade off because not things shouldn't be really about money, but I think as I get older and as your values and your priorities shift, work used to be in your 20s, work is everything. It's like I work very, very hard to try and really establish a career that I could grow over time so that eventually you wouldn't necessarily have to work. It's not that you don't work hard, but you wouldn't have to necessarily constantly be working at that intensity to
Right.
maintain. But because there isn't really a star system here, which has good and bad things to it, you kind of always are going to have to a little bit. Like it's a rare few where they can really be a household name, and you did it here. Uh, maybe Sarah Polly, or maybe
Yeah.
Scott Speed. I don't know. Like you can think of it. Most people have to leave to make their name, and then once you've made your name, people offering you things, and the salary is three, four, five, six times the amount. So there's a lot of incentive for people to leave Canada to be successful in the entertainment industry. I would say that is changing in our favor. And you don't necessarily need to live in Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal anymore to be a successful actor. You can shoot an audition out of your room in Sarnia, wherever you are. And if you can get it into an agent or to a casting agent, someone could find you and be like, "Yeah, you're going to be our next Spider-Man," and that's just that's the way things have changed. So I think those are real positives, and for writers too. You could write something in your room that's really good, and you submit it unsolicited or whatever to an agent or to somebody, and they can find you wherever you are, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. And well, talking about a TV show that films in Canada, let's dive into a role of yours that you just absolutely own. And that's the television journalist Cameron Coleman on The Boys, the host of the Cameron Coleman Hour, 7 on 7 on What News Network,
Yeah,
VNN.
yeah,
The
and yeah.
show is such a fresh take on the superhero genre. It's part satire, part social commentary, all within this confines of the world of superheroes. So, before landing the role of Cameron Coleman, were you a fan of the show?
You know what? I'll be honest. I didn't even know about the show. I didn't. I mean, I knew a little bit about it, um, but I didn't like. I wasn't a fan of the show. I didn't know enough about that kind of thing. Also, I was deep into diapers at the time of kids. Like the
Yeah.
opportunity to watch shows was rare, and I do tend to like when I get a minute to myself. Sometimes I still read books. I sometimes I'm just like would rather. It depends. I love shows. I love TV. I love movies. I'm a huge movie buff like you, and but sometimes I'm like, geez, do I have an hour? And if I have a full, because you need it to watch the see to the end.
Yeah.
I don't want to be like, oh, it's getting good, and like now I gotta go because my kid needs something. So books are handy for that. I can just pop it down. But I remember the audition came in. The funny thing is with this, like it came in. I had basically enough time to kind of like read the scene, look at it, what it was, and to me, it was always just sort of like a 1 day kind of thing. You just pop on and you do your thing, and put your work hat on and take it off and go home. I can't say for certain whether they had the plan for this arc of this character at the time. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised. They do uh, consider a lot of that show, and they try to stay ahead of the audience while incorporating ideas and things. But they're always so innovative. I think what happened for me was that I remember I shot it sort of late at night. I did like do it and got and I did it, and then I sent it in, and then like a couple of weeks later or something, my agent called and said, "Oh, you booked this thing," and I was like, what is it? Like what was the thing I booked? Like I don't even remember this scene. And she's like, "Oh, it's this character on this thing." And I was like, "Oh yeah, okay. So it'll be kind of like of a one-off and I'll go in and do the thing." But when I got to set that day, I remember we shot a couple of things and one of the producers came up and he said, "Yeah, if you have anything you want to do, or if you have some thoughts about the scene, or some dialogue you want to adjust or something, we're very open to that. Just let us know like what you're thinking." And he was sort of talking to me as if that's the kind of conversation you have usually when you're playing a larger arc of a role, where they say like, "Hey, we like what you're bringing to this. Like, we want to do this. You're doing this. Like, let's design this together. Where do we not want to go with this, and where do we want to really like embrace?"
Right.
And those are the kinds of conversations you'll have. Not usually for like a walk on kind of like day role. So I was like, "Oh, that's kind of odd." That we It was very nice. I remember immediately loving the vibe of that set. Um, I think I felt like on a superhero type show, you're going to have a lot of alpha type individuals and egos and things like that. And sometimes, it's not often, but sometimes you get on these sets and everyone's sort of walking around on eggshells, and you just got to be careful you don't say the wrong thing, or you got to make sure you're really ready to go and you do everything right, because it's very tense and people are unhappy. Like it's that sometimes you get that sort of vibe, and I don't know why, but I guess I thought because it was like a superhero, big
Yeah.
American TV superhero show is going to be a bit of that. I couldn't have been more wrong. And I think one of the things about The Boys that maybe some fans or people don't realize is actually how fun that set is. Like everybody on that set, at least in my experience and in my interactions, was lovely. Like everybody was awesome, inviting, welcoming, playful. No, like people walking off to their trailers and you never see them. And it was just people who were there and having fun and focused, there to do a job. Um, yeah, so it was one of those things. I didn't know it at the time. Someone told me later, the showrunner, he has this um, kind of rule. He's like, "On my shows, there's only room for," can I swear on this show or no?
Yeah, go for
No,
it.
no.
It's the
But
internet.
he
Go
says
for
like,
it.
yeah, yeah. He goes, "There's only room for one asshole, and it's me." So he's like, "There's no assholes on my show." He's like, "Because if there is, their characters die off. They tend to go away, just because it is one of those things where they are like little towns, and it only takes one or two people to really spoil the whole thing. And it's not a day down the mines. We're here to be doing something we love to do, but it's a serious job, and you should show up prepared. You should show up with your lines learned. You should show up with an idea of how you're going to play the scene. You should also be aware of what the focus of the scene is. If it's not be aware of where the focus of what the scene is about, and what needs to be achieved in this scene for it to function in the greater whole of the story. One of the things I would advise like younger actors is, like I say, you're not actually trying to stand out. You're trying to blend in. If you do your job really well, people kind of forget you're acting. They kind of forget you were there. You just went in, you did your thing just right, not too much, not too little, just right. And they got exactly what they needed. Now, there's another little level. Sometimes you can look for little opportunities where you can um, depending on the choice and how much they can stretch, you can find interesting options and choices, play other ideas that maybe are a little more bold or a little, and see how they go. And they'll tell you right away. They'll be like, "Yeah, what you did there, we like the other one better," or "What you did there, go do more of that, go further with that." So that's where things kind of can get more enjoyable. And with
Mhm.
Cameron Coleman, it was it was like I came in just initially to do this little sort of scene, and they liked it, so I would do a little bit more. And I in my head I was always sort of thinking of Bill O'Reilly and Tucker Carlson, obviously.
Right, right.
Um, so it was for me particularly fun to sort of spoof those types of uh, pseudo journalists, and who are kind of shills for their networks point of view. Yeah, and I think you know I don't know what it is. So, someone said, but a friend of mine sent me a quote or something from Dateline magazine, about my character in the show, and they're like, Matthew Edison and his punchable face, or and I was like, yeah, I think that's true. I think I do have a bit of a punchable face, and maybe that helps for someone like Cameron to you just want to love to hate the guy.
Yeah, definitely. And what I enjoy about your character in the show is that he goes beyond just a TV show and is used as a storytelling device and like between seasons to fill in details on the VOD International YouTube page. And you then transitioned onto the show this last season with the Cameron Coleman Hour and shared some amazing scenes with Antony Starr, who of course plays Homelander on the show. You guys
Yeah.
had such a great natural chemistry and working alongside with an actor who's got such screen presence as Antony. Can you describe filming those scenes with him?
First of all, I'll just say Anthony is awesome. He's a gent. Like he's like he himself is sort of an intense person. Like he in the best way. Like he's very, very smart. He's very, very sharp. He's got real opinions. He's phenomenal at his work, at his job. If you've seen him in other roles, he has a facility with camera acting in particular, and you can read a lot into what he's thinking just by the subtle looks and that kind of thing, which for some actors takes a while to acquire that. And but he's always exciting. He'll never do the same take twice. He can give you lots of options. He can throw you off. He intentionally, like, I think that's what's fun. I can't speak for him, but I'll say that from my end of things, that's part of, I think, the enjoyment we would have is that, hey, he's very gracious. Like when you come on, he's not there to like take the scene from you. He's there, he really comes in and he wants you to bring your best to the scene too. And that's a very giving partner, and that's what you really want when you come in. If you're coming in for two lines, or you're coming in, you have a big old scene, you want the people that lead the show to represent the show. If you're they probably you guys probably know now on your podcast, like if you're a number one or number two, number three,
Yeah.
they're go descending, right? So if you're the lead on the show, you're a number one, and then there's number twos and so on. Some people in like The Boys, it's a very ensemble type show, but Anthony is number one. So it's like they have a responsibility, like I would say, a diplomatic responsibility to set the tone a little bit for how you behave on set. Personally, like you can be on a certain show, and if that person's late all the time or doesn't really know their stuff or whatever, people start to feel like that's cool to do, and you can do that on that show. And some shows kind of are like that. It's a bit chaotic, but that's kind of the way it is. But when Andy comes on, he's sometimes lots of lines, lots of big scenes, lots of things, notes that he's got to hit, and he comes in prepared, and he comes in ready to play. And if he throws a line or doesn't go kind of right, he keeps it light and playful and keeps the momentum moving forward. So I I love getting into scenes with him because he likes to. It's when the camera starts rolling, there is a natural, especially for our characters, like my character, I think, worships, he loves Homelander, completely like backs everything he does. Um, Maybe even unbeknownst to him, subconsciously a little homoerotic interest in Homelander. I don't know. I've certainly played with that in my character's head, but he likes to play. So when you get in there in the scene, he may not say everything the way it's written, and I like to go toe to toe with people like that. I have an improvisational background, so it keeps things real. I always feel like once you know a character well enough that you can improvise in that character, then you really know that character. You know the rhythm of the way they think, what they find funny, what they don't, what irks them or gets them upset, all those things. So when you're throwing different things at that character, you'll see them in all these different shapes and colors. And I always like the idea of Cameron being, even though he is somewhat two dimensional in his points of view in his life, that he has a complexity and a depth to him that you should be able to feel in different scenes. We'll see this year. I think you get to see a little bit more of him in that way. And yeah, so I really enjoyed working with him, to say
Mhm.
the least. Yeah,
For sure. And
as
well,
I
it look,
did with everybody. You know.
yeah, absolutely. And well, it looks like season four marketing may be underway already with one of your videos being released on the upcoming trial of Homelander on the Vought
Yeah.
YouTube page. Hashtag coal miners, hashtag home free. So here is hoping we get to see a lot more of you in this upcoming season. And this show tackles so many different important social issues, and most importantly, what it means to have powers and what one should do with them and what one shouldn't. And now, as someone who is part of the show, and even let's take a step back and more generally, as yourself, a fan of cinema, generally speaking, a character like Homelander or Darth Vader, do you think they're redeemable? Or a character like Homelander at this point, are they at a point of no return where the character is who he is?
I mean, that's some of the themes they're dealing with. So some of that question, I think, is kind of like the question is more important than the answer. But I would say the other part of it is it's almost in the mind of the viewer because you know, does Homelander think he's redeemable? Does Homelander think he's wrong? Does Homelander think other people need to be redeemed? Um, you know, he if you follow the show and you understand his backstory, I personally have a little empathy for him. Essentially, you know, he's essentially raised in a petri dish. I mean, he's essentially parentless. Um, you know, what does it mean for a child to be raised with no moral direction and be given all this power? And the duplicitousness of how we present publicly and how we behave privately, which is the world we're in. You know, people we talk about this as a post-truth world and all this, but I think we're at a point now where it's too many instances of misbehavior behind the scenes caught and then kind of washed over because of some media spinning and you know, I mean, I think nowadays it's like you can find out, oh, Matt Edison did this awful thing, and it comes out in 10:30 in the morning. But then I just talk to my representatives and I say, yeah, can we just throw out five other stories that aren't true? And by noon, there's six stories swimming out there about me, and there's like most of them are not true. So it's like you don't even know. And then by the end of the day, it's dead. And tomorrow there's more news. So we don't care anymore what's true. We believe the story that matches our belief about that person, and that's what's true. You know, we obviously think of Trump, and you think of other people who've been caught doing horrible things, like actually caught on tape and all this stuff. And you'd think it would be crazy that we'd live in a world where the leader of, at the time, the free world, could not just be a misogynist, but assault women, be caught for doing it, and in a campaign for the job, and still get the job. And then you
Yeah.
try turning to your daughter and say that that's okay, that that person got the job, right? And we kind of sometimes even forget because there's just been so many things, and he's not the only one, you know. And it's not a left or a right thing. It's just it's about character and your actions, and you know, more and more and more. I feel like just watch how people, just pay attention to how people, what choices people make, and that will tell you about them versus what you hear about them or what they say about themselves or what their promotional content says. People are what they do, and it's not that people can't change a little, but you know, people are what they are. Homelander is the sum of his actions, And if you read a lot of the commentary on the show online, which I haven't, admittedly, but even the some that I've gone through to just, or even on clips of Cameron, it's fun. It's really interesting to see the polarization, even in the comments, about how like Cameron Coleman and Homelander are saving America. And now some of it's a parody as well. Like a lot of people are
Right.
parodying in the comments, but there's also people I think who are like legitimately like, if only we had a Homelander who could just wipe out the people that are annoying, and then the world rid. And other people are like, you know, some people think it's a real show. It's not a parody. It's very funny.
It's true. It's funny how you brought up a lot of those comments. If you go on like any YouTube channel, like especially like the main boys one on the Amazon network there, all the
Yeah.
comments are such like troll comments and they're all just again, you don't know where's the line within the parody or if some people or like one random crazy person actually believes that, you know what, hey, the world will be a better place with the Homelander. It's funny how the world has taken a show like this. And I'm sure in this upcoming season, we'll definitely further explore that as Homelander continues to become more and more unhinged.
Do when I was like, oh, they're developing this character, they're growing this character, and I remember thinking like, they're how do they do this so successfully? It's a hard show to pull off when you think of it, because America at the time, and maybe even still is a little bit, was sort of like a parody of itself. We had this, it was like a parody. It was like and I remember someone said about Robert Altman's movie Pret-a-Porter, which was sort of a parody of the fashion industry, is that one of the reasons they felt it didn't work was, which I don't say it doesn't work, I just, this person felt that, but was that they said it's hard to parody a parody. The fashion industry does have people walking around in giant hats and wearing like massive shoulders that are like 6 meters long, and it is and there are people who take it very seriously, and like it is a parody. So when you do a parody of a parody, it tends to like lose its impact. And I was a little like, how are they pulling this off? Because they're parodying America and they're parodying the Marvel universe. But I think like they just managed to get that tone just right. Like some people will say, "Oh, I can't watch this; so it's too violent." And I'm like, "Well, part of the reason the violence is so over the top, and it is, like people eviscerate, and it should make you. It's almost meant to be like entertaining in a way, but it's also saying like this is a violent culture. America is a violent culture. These superheroes that you love, like Superman, Batman, also pick up cars and throw them down the middle of a street to get their enemy. Meanwhile, blowing up all kinds of civilian like things and just destroying the whole city just to get their one enemy. It's the kind of thing, if you saw it on the playground, those two people would be put in a detention. But you more I put a morality thing on it, say this person's a villain and this person's good, and it's allowed. Like he can't do it, but if you do it to get him, it's fine. So I think what's neat about the boys is they, and the writer of the original comic book series, is that they see that absurdity and this kind of glorified heroism of what America decides is heroic versus what real heroism is, which is
Mhm.
usually just common people who aren't filled with muscles, who do remarkable things, even though they're very afraid to do them. And it's not popular, but they do it anyway because it's the right thing to do. Those types of heroes are very rare. And that's really like, and if you put that in a comic book or you put that in a movie, they wouldn't look anything like Homelander. And in our show, obviously, we have like sociopaths and people who are questionably uh, mental health issues, and
Yeah.
you just spin it right, and you're like, oh, they're saving us. You know, the world.
Yeah.
It's in a way more prophetic in its commentary of modern culture for being that outlandish.
Yeah. No, it most definitely is. And yeah, no, I'm really excited to see in season 4 how that arc continues of all the characters. So transitioning from the boys, what's the
Yeah.
dream project for you, Matthew? If you haven't already done it, what's the dream project?
Well, that's a good question. I would love to do a like one of those sort of like complex detective role. Like
Okay.
I might, like on a series where um I don't know, I grew up my mom watching a lot of like murder mysteries and detective things and stuff like that. But I would love to do like a very strong character driven point of view detective show where there's a real depth and complexity to that character. Meanwhile, you get to watch them try to solve puzzles and crimes and things like that, which I also enjoy. But I just think it would be fun to have a character that you could start off with that has an elevator in it that can go very deep and can go up very high, and you can oscillate between that so that in depending on the context of the scene you put the character in, you can see quite dramatic differences of personality and play with the audience's expectation of his point of view, whether it's right or wrong or earnest or honest. And um, that to me as an actor is a lot of fun, is to work within a particular framework of a character, but like so almost like a Sherlock Holmes or somebody where you're
Yeah.
like, they're so I mean, the original Sherlock Holmes, he was a heroin addict. He could play the violin. He was almost like the devil, actually. Incredibly smart, but arrogant. Did not work within the police system. So the police did not be like, oh, we got to ask this guy, well, who's he? And he's
Mm.
basically a private eye. Anyone can be a private eye. You can be a private eye. You don't even need a license. You just go around, you can do it. So I think that's kind of fascinating as someone who is a hunter of sorts, trying to solve something and like single focused on this purpose to the detriment of the world around and the life around him that's maybe more complex. Yeah, that's my type of. I would love to do one of those and get that out of my system.
Well, hey, if anyone from HBO is listening to this or comes across this, please hit up Matthew Edison for True Detective season 10 or whatever they're on now. So, yeah, that's
Be awesome.
great. That's great. That's great to hear. And as we wrap up with Matthew Edison, it's not time for a segment I call the final act. Matthew, I'm going to ask you 10 rapid fire questions about your likes and your dislikes. And I just want the first thing that comes to your mind. But here's the catch:
Okay.
we're going to try to get through them in 1 minute or less. You up for it?
Okay. I think so.
Movies or TV shows?
Movies
Watch at home or at a movie theater?
at home.
Favorite movie?
Oh Jesus. Oh God. Mean Streets.
Favorite TV show?
That's really hard. That I'm not in, obviously. That would make sense. Favorite TV show, right? I just watched Jury Duty. I quite like that. Good.
All right. Favorite character on The Boys?
Oh, Colby's character Ashley.
There you go. Favorite season of the year?
Favorite season of that show,
Of the
or
year,
season of
of
the year
generally, yeah,
of
generally.
fall,
Fall, okay.
October,
Okay.
fall.
Does pineapple belong on pizza?
No,
Your go-to
my
Tim
wife would
Hortons order.
disagree. She's
Well, hey,
she's a
I
bit
agree
out
with
there.
you on that big time. Your go-to Tim Hortons order.
Just small two cream, one sugar or black.
Describe Cameron Coleman in one word,
Uh, Shill.
and describe your journey in the arts in one word.
Um, Fun.
Man, hey, you killed it at that. We got there just at that minute
Did we
mark,
do
but
it?
hey, we got it. But you know what? Hey, you know what? I threw you off there with that favorite movie and that favorite TV show because
Those are
when you think
hard.
of that, I know it changes
I
sometimes
mean,
for you and me day by day. So,
I'm gonna walk away and like that's what I'll be left thinking for like the next hour. It's like, oh, why didn't I say that? That's my favorite show. That's my so
hey, well,
I
it's all
know.
good. I appreciate honest answers and the candid answers as well. Matthew, thank you so much for being a guest on the show today, man. And I love what you're doing so much in The Boys, and it's such a breath of fresh air. It's absolutely one of my favorite shows, and all the great work you've done in the Canadian film and TV industry and trying to help grow this industry further for all of us. I think it's great. I truly wish you all the best with your upcoming projects. And hey, I look forward to having you back on the show to discuss the next one.
Talal, my friend, thank you for inviting me. It was an honor and privilege. I had a lot of fun, and I love the show. Thank you.